Welcome to Ask an Expert, Alternatives to Guardianship with Jennifer Donovan. I'm Deb Chido from Ask Resource Center, and I'll be facilitating our conversation with Jennifer around alternatives to guardianship. Jennifer is the public guardian for the state of Iowa. She received her law degree from the University of Iowa College of Law. Prior to joining the Office of Public Guardian, she practiced law for 11 years as a staff attorney at Iowa Legal Aid. She is a member of the National Guardianship Association and the Iowa State Bar Association. Jennifer, thank you so much for joining Ask and sharing your expertise about alternatives to guardianship.
Well, thank you so much for having me. This is actually one of my very favorite topics to talk about. So I will go ahead and just dive right in. First, I'll give a little bit of background on what the Office of Public Guardian is and does. The Office of Public Guardian is a state program, and we're housed within the Iowa Department on Aging. Don't let that fool you, though. We do serve adults of all ages 18 and up. The Office of Public Guardian has three main functions. One is that we serve as guardian and conservator of last resort for Iowans 18 and older who have no one to serve in that role, don't have resources to compensate a private guardian or conservator, and whose needs can't be met by less restrictive alternatives. We also provide information and referral to the public about guardianship, conservatorship, and alternatives. So that would be things like this presentation and others like it, but also more informal, get calls and emails with questions about these topics. And then we also provide training and education for guardians and conservators to help them understand their responsibilities and find and access services that they might need for the individuals that they serve. So today we're going to talk a little bit about less restrictive alternatives to guardianship. In the previous webinar, we talked about guardianship and conservatorship. So this time we're going to talk about some of those alternatives. And you've probably heard the phrase least restrictive alternative in some context before. For example, federal law requires that students who receive special education be educated in the least restrictive environment. And that means that the student should receive as much of their education as possible in the same environment as their non-disabled peers. So the same type of thing applies to decision-making supports. Adults have the legal right to make their own decisions. Some adults may have disabilities that affect their decision-making capacity, so they might need help and support to make decisions. And for a long time, it was presumed that they would need someone else to step in and make those decisions for them. Guardianship and conservatorship allow that. They allow someone else to be appointed to make decisions for an adult. But these are restrictive because they take that right to make decisions away from an adult with a disability. So when it comes to decision-making supports, we can say that the least restrictive alternative means providing decision-making supports that are most similar to the types of support that non-disabled adults might receive. And when we think about those decision-making supports for people with disabilities that affect their decision-making capacity, we can think about them on a spectrum. Different types of decision-making supports are going to fall in different places on this spectrum. So on one end, we have autonomy and self-determination. Supports down here are going to be the least restrictive of a person's rights because the supports at this end of the spectrum are going to help a person make their own decisions. On the other end is dependence and loss of rights. These supports would be the most restrictive of a person's rights because the supports at this end of the spectrum limit their right to make their own decisions and allow someone else to step in and make decisions for them. And so we can see where some things are going to fall on this spectrum. Full guardianship is going to be pretty far at that restrictive end. Something like a power of attorney is going to fall somewhere in the middle. Limited guardianship is going to be kind of in between the two of those. And something like supported decision-making is going to fall more at the autonomy and self-determination. There are a lot of different tools that can be used to support someone's decision-making. They can be really broad and cover a lot of different types of decisions, or they can be really specific and address just one or two types of decisions. And this slide shows just some of the types of tools that can be used as decision-making supports, and specifically the ones that we're going to talk about today. When it comes to deciding which tool or tools to use, it's important to consider what the person's actual needs are. So tailoring the decision-making supports to the individual person's needs is going to be the best way to ensure that you found that least restrictive alternative for that person. Supported decision-making is an alternative to guardianship that makes use of various tools to help the person make their own decisions. It can be informal or it can be formal. And informally, it's not really any different from how you or I might ask a friend, a family member, or a professional to help us make a decision, whether it's buying a car or repairing our house or choosing a medical treatment. Literally anyone can use supported decision making. What's great about supported decision making is that it recognizes that inherent right that all people have to make decisions for themselves, and it helps support people with disabilities in learning how to make decisions. And it can, on a more formal level, it can make use of any of these other tools if they're being used to support the individual and help them make their own decisions. You could use supported decision making in conjunction with natural supports from family and friends, in conjunction with powers of attorney, in conjunction with case management, supportive services from agencies. It's even something that can be used within the context of a guardianship or conservatorship. Supported decision making can also be more formal. So some states have actually added it to their laws as an official alternative to guardianship. And in those situations, they've usually come up with some type of a written agreement between the person and a team of supporters. And that written agreement sets out what role each supporter plays in helping the person make decisions. But ultimately, that final decision belongs to the person who's at the center of that agreement. There are a couple of national clearinghouses, resources that provide more information about supported decision making. And I've included 2 of those websites on here. Both of those have information about kind of the history of supported decision making, some of the sample forms that other states use, and things like that, if folks are interested in looking into that. And our office is looking into ways to kind of bring supported decision making to Iowa as a more formally recognized alternative. Probably the easiest tool that can be used to help someone with decision making is a release of information form. So a lot of times the concern that family members and caregivers have is that they won't have access to information about the person that they're helping. And there are a lot of privacy laws in place that do limit the amount of information that certain people and organizations can share about the customers that they serve. Usually this is a good thing, right? You probably don't want me to be able to call up your doctor or your bank and just get information about you. So privacy laws are a good thing. They have a good purpose, but sometimes they can get in the way. So if a person wants their doctor, their school, their bank, a government agency, a company they do business with, anyone who might have, confidential information about them, that they wouldn't just widely share, they might want those people or organizations to share that information with someone who's helping them make decisions. If that's the case, they can give permission for that information to be shared. They might be able to do that verbally. So it might be enough to, whether it's going in person or over the phone, have them say, yes, I want you to share information with so-and-so. But a written release of information form can also help to make clear exactly what information should be shared, who it can be shared with, and for how long. Another area that commonly kind of leads to that push for guardianship or conservatorship is with regards to education. When teenagers with intellectual or developmental disabilities or mental illness turn 18, parents and teachers are often concerned about their education. And if those students were receiving special education services, at 18, they become responsible for their own IEP. So parents might worry that they'll be excluded from the IEP team or that they're going to lose the right to participate in the IEP process. And schools might suggest to parents that they need to file for guardianship to address this. And there are a couple of things to know, though. Students can invite anyone they want to attend their IEP meetings and be a part of the IEP team. So this could be their parents, case managers, it could be a friend who's helping them out with things. Anyone that's helping and supporting that student could invite to join them as part of the IEP team. Students can also sign releases of information to allow the school and the AEA to share information with parents or other supporters. If a student is actually unable to make informed decisions about their education, an educational representative can be appointed to make decisions about the student's education, but this is going to be different from a guardianship because this person's role is only related to those educational decisions, not to any other types of life decisions. This is something that the IEP team should be looking at well before the student turns 18. Transition planning is required under the IDEA and must start no later than age 14. That transition planning is the process of preparing the student for life after high school, and preparing the student to take the lead in their IEP team should be a part of this transition planning. The IEP team should be encouraging the student to take an increasing role so that they're ready when they turn 18. Another common decision-making tool is a power of attorney. Power of attorney is a written document in which one person gives another person the authority to act on their behalf. And we call the person who signs the document and gives someone else authority to make decisions for them, we call that person the principal. And then the person who is given the authority to act for the principal, we call that person the agent or the attorney in fact. I like to describe power of attorney as a sharing of decision-making authority, because as long as the principal is able to make decisions, they retain their right to do so. They can also give as much or as little authority to their agent as they want. So you can kind of compare it to like the employer-employee relationship. If you're hired into a job, your employer is giving you certain authority to do things on behalf of that, that business or that organization or what have you. And what exactly your authority is going to depend on what authority your employer gives you. So my employer gives me certain authorities, but I can't mess with payroll. I can't hire and fire people. But there are definitely certain things that I can do under that authority. That's going to be similar to a power of attorney, that principal is giving certain authorities to their agent to be able to do things on their behalf. So there are two kinds of power of attorney that are recognized in Iowa. One of them is the durable healthcare power of attorney. This type of power of attorney allows the agent to make healthcare decisions on behalf of the principal. A healthcare power of attorney only takes effect when the principal's attending physician certifies that the principal is unable to make their own decisions. If the principal regains the ability to make their own healthcare decisions, then the agent should no longer make decisions for the principal. So I'm named as the agent in my mother's power of attorney. She's able to make all of her own healthcare decisions. Right now, that's a piece of paper in a drawer and in her chart at her doctor's office. If something should happen, then they know who they need to contact. I would make those decisions based on what instructions she's given me and what I know about her. But then if she recovers and gets better, we put that right back in the drawer, right back in the chart, and she goes back to making her decisions. The principal can include instructions in this document about what types of decisions they would or wouldn't want made in certain circumstances. The most common one is end of life decisions. When would you want life-sustaining treatment to be ended? What circumstances would you want certain measures to be taken or not taken? But they can also be used to provide instructions about, for example, someone with mental illness, when would they want to use certain types of medications or electroconvulsive therapy, or would they not want to use those things? It can be more specific depending on the individual's conditions and needs. The other type of power of attorney is a general power of attorney. This one is used for financial decisions. This one can be really broad and give the agent the ability to handle a wide range of financial decisions, from managing someone's bank accounts to voting their stock shares to handling, just about any type of financial decision. Or it can be really specific and give the agent the authority to complete a single transaction on one specific date. There are a few things that are a little different with the general power of attorney. It can take effect immediately upon signing. So it can take effect even if the principal still is able to make all of their own decisions. or it can be set to take effect sometime in the future. So it could be used as that planning tool if someone's worried that they might be unable to make decisions for themselves in the future. An agent under a general power of attorney can't just do whatever they want with the principal's money and property. They have a fiduciary duty to the principal, which means they need to follow the principal's directions about how to manage the money and property. They can't use it for their own benefit. And if the agent tries to convince the principal to transfer money or property to the agent, there's a presumption that this was undue influence because of the nature of that trusted relationship, that the agent is in a position of trust and confidence to that principal and should really be, trying to act on the principal's behalf. What does it take for a power of attorney document to be valid? In order to sign a power of attorney, the principal must be an adult, so over 18. They must have the capacity to understand the decision to sign the document. Now, they may not have the capacity to make certain other decisions, but as long as they can understand what it is that this document is doing, that there are decisions that need to be made, things that need to be handled or managed, and that this is the person that they trust to make those decisions or handle those things, then they likely have the capacity to sign that document. And they must be doing it voluntarily. So I'll hear folks say, I need to get power of attorney over my mother or brother or whoever. And that always raises a red flag for me because it really should be going the other way. It's a giving of authority, not something that you get or that you take. A valid power of attorney document must be in writing. That it can be handwritten, it can be typed, there are forms with fill in the blanks. It needs to have the name of the agent. It needs to have what responsibilities and authorities they're being given. It needs to be signed and dated by the principal, and it needs to be notarized, or if it's the durable healthcare power of attorney, it can be signed by 2 witnesses. The principal and the 2 witnesses all have to sign in each other's presence, so they all have to watch each other sign it. Some important things to know about power of attorney. First, the principal retains the right to make their own decisions. The agent can't overrule a decision by the principal. If there's a concern that maybe the principal's decision-making capacity has become significantly impaired, and so now they're making decisions that are not reasoned through, that are going to be harmful to them, for example, it might be necessary to pursue guardianship or conservatorship at that point. Secondly, powers of attorney are revocable. So the principal can revoke that power of attorney as long as they have the capacity to do so. And in the case of a healthcare power of attorney, we really don't look for capacity. As long as they can communicate their decision to revoke the power of attorney, it can be revoked. Now that's important because they might not have the capacity to then sign a new one and name someone else as their agent. So that's another situation where then if there's a need for someone to make those types of decisions, guardianship or conservatorship might be the only alternative that remains. Another thing to know is that there are no reporting requirements. So powers of attorney aren't overseen by the court. There's not some type of a registry where somebody keeps track of all of them. The only time that the courts would get involved is if someone sues because they think that the agent has acted outside of their authority. First of all, it's possible to name co-agents. There are some risks to this because the co-agents need to be able to agree on decisions. Doesn't mean that they always need to agree right at the outset, but sometimes we'll see folks that they have family members that don't get along and they don't want to pick and choose and have one feel like, oh, they're choosing the other over them. So they name multiple of their children or parents or siblings or whoever as their co-agents. But these are folks that refuse to communicate with each other or who just cannot get along, don't have any process for reaching agreement. That never bodes well. They don't work well as co-agents. So you want to make sure if you're naming co-agents that you're picking people who may not always see eye to eye in the first place. Sometimes that can be a good thing, but have that process to talk things out and come to an agreement on decisions that need to be made. And then finally, the principal can state who they would want as their guardian or conservator if that would ever be necessary. It's ultimately still up to the court to decide, but the court is usually going to take the person's preferences into account. So another area that a lot of folks have concern is with money management. And this can come up, at any age, of just what happens if someone is unable to or struggling with managing their own finances. And in a lot of situations, conservatorship is not going to be necessary because there are a variety of other money management tools that are available. So these can be pretty straightforward, simple things like a bill payer service, which could be someone, a friend or family member, or a program that helps older adults or individuals with disabilities organize their bills and their checkbooks and make sure that things get paid, that they follow a budget, that everything gets paid on time. It could also be more high tech, setting things up for an automatic withdrawal or automatic payment to kind of take away some of that needing to remember every month and go through the process of writing out checks and mailing them out. Representative payee is another option if someone's receiving Social Security Administration benefits or Veterans Administration benefits. Both of those agencies have a process to appoint a representative payee to manage those benefits. Benefit recipient, beneficiary isn't able to manage their own benefits. Those representative payees only have authority over those federal benefits. So if there are other sources of income or other property, the payee is not going to have any authority to manage those. But that can be a really good alternative for someone who, that's their only source of income. There are some debit cards out there that you can use prepaid debit cards or debit cards that have spending controls that limit times of day that they can be used or how much can be spent, or types of businesses can't be used online, can't be used at the casino, can't be used wherever, to kind of help control spending. Sometimes folks will want to use joint bank accounts. That, I say, definitely proceed with caution. There are some risks with joint bank accounts, both in terms of if you are receiving any sort of public benefits like Social Security, that a joint account, anything in that account is owned by both owners. So if there's money that's put into that account that's not those benefits, that's going to be considered money owned by the beneficiary, which might affect continued eligibility for those benefits. But also that then there's the risk that the other person could take money out of the account and spend it, and that there wouldn't necessarily be legal recourse if they are a co-owner of that account. So there are definitely some risks with joint accounts. It's worth talking, if you're thinking of going that route, it's worth talking with the banker about what options there are to really put restrictions on that account to ensure that there's not mismanagement of those funds. And then obviously a power of attorney can be used to help manage any type of financial matters, either broadly or specifically. As far as financial planning tools, sometimes it's not a matter just of managing money now, but of planning for the future. There are a couple of good options that families can use, when they're looking at plans for a family member who has a disability. The PASS plans through Social Security is a plan for achieving self-support. It allows income or resources that would otherwise affect eligibility for SSI to be excluded for consideration. What happens is that the individual will choose an occupational goal. Maybe they want to pursue some further education or training. Maybe they want to start a business, become self-employed. Maybe they need a certain piece of equipment, an accessible vehicle to get to work, or something that will help them pursue their occupational goal. And then they can set aside income or resources to achieve that goal. The key with this is that it has to be approved by Social Security before it can be put into place. So don't just think, okay, we've got this other income or these other resources and we're going to use it toward this, and that's great. You need to go through the process with Social Security to say, here's what we're going to set aside, here's how it's going to meet that goal. They have a plan form to fill out, and they'll approve it. And then at that point, that income or those resources, once they've approved it, can be set aside to meet that goal. Another financial planning tool is ABLE Act accounts. And I think the numbers that I have on here as the caps may have changed this year, and I need to update those. But generally, the cool thing with ABLE Act accounts is that they kind of parallel the college savings accounts, the 529 plan, because contributions can be made by any person, the beneficiary that owns the account, family member, the friends. So it's a good way for parents, grandparents, and other family friends to make contributions all into one account. Total contributions are capped per year, and there's a maximum amount that can be saved before SSI benefits get suspended. That's about $100,000. Once the amount in the account drops below that again, then the SSI benefits can resume. And funds in these accounts can be spent on any qualified disability expenses. So it offers beneficiaries and families a little bit more flexibility and choice and control than with like a special needs trust or a pooled income trust. And there are a couple of resources on here to get more information about the ABLE Act accounts. And then we have the first financial planning tool, which is special needs trusts. This was one of the first tools that was used for people on Medicaid. Generally, a special needs trust needs to be created by someone other than the beneficiary, so a parent, grandparent, legal guardian, or the court. These are good tools especially for the parents and grandparents who are looking to do up their will and leave funds to children or grandchildren. It's a good way to ensure that that inheritance is not going to detrimentally impact the receipt of those Medicaid benefits. But it does have some limitations to it. And one thing to know is that after the beneficiary dies, any remaining funds in that trust go to the state up to the amount of the Medicaid benefit that was received by the beneficiary. So it's good to think, when planning for these trusts, what are we going to be spending it on? Because at the end, anything that's left in there is going to go to the state. So you do want to make use of it during the person's life to pay for any expenses that aren't covered by Medicaid or other sources that they have, that are related to their disability. So I think that wraps up some of the alternatives. I've got my contact information on here. I'm always happy to take questions by phone or email if folks have questions about something covered in this webinar or about how to access any of these alternatives, or where to find more resources about them. I will go ahead and take questions.
Thank you, Jennifer. Great information about alternatives to guardianship. I do have just a couple of questions for you. One came in. I'm just going to read it. I understand what you are saying about not approaching it as I need to get power of attorney, but if my loved one really cannot even safely and rationally make that decision or give that power, does that mean I really need to consider a guardian and conservatorship instead?
Yes. If they're not willing to sign a power of attorney, or if they're not able to make that decision of who they would want to make decisions on their own behalf, then guardianship or conservatorship is going to be the alternative that's necessary.
All right, thank you. I've got another question for you. In many states, special needs trust funds can go to someone other than the state. In Iowa, that amount to the state for Medicaid happens first, right?
I think the ones that you're talking about, maybe some of the pooled special needs trusts, they generally will have the ability to then, because it's multiple people sharing into the pooled trust, that they'll be able to use those trust resources for the other beneficiaries. In Iowa, generally, most of the special needs trusts are not pooled special needs trusts. I don't believe that we have anyone in the state that provides them. I think there's at least one entity in a neighboring state that does have some Iowa residents in their pooled special needs trust. But most of those individual ones that are going to be set up for just one person, those are going to have the state as the one who receives anything that's remaining in that trust.
All right. And of course, you've made it very clear your contact information. If they have questions, they can contact you by phone, not just email. So that's great. I do have another question for you. Can you explain more about what a representative payee would do?
So a representative payee is going to receive Social Security benefits or VA benefits on behalf of the person who's actually eligible for on behalf of the actual beneficiary or recipient of those benefits. So the money is going to be sent to the representative payee. Their role is to use those funds on the beneficiary's expenses. So to pay the rent, pay the utilities, buy the groceries, those sorts of things, to set a budget, provide that person with spending money, cash throughout the month, and then document what those funds were spent on, maintaining receipts, having the beneficiary bring back receipts for things that they've spent funds on directly, and then doing a report annually to Social Security or the VA saying, here's how much money came in, here's what it was spent on, and just being available to have that audited. There would be a more in-depth audit. For the most part, family member representative payees don't have quite as stringent a reporting or auditing process as private entities or organizations that are serving as representative payee for multiple individuals. And that's because there have been some instances of those organizations really misusing or misappropriating funds on a large scale. So Social Security is really taking a deeper look into those to make sure that there's not that type of misuse going on.
Sure. Something you touched on is the importance of transition planning at age 14. So that's really a good reminder for families to really make sure students are involved in that process starting at the age of 14. I have another question for you. I'm concerned about preserving the relationship that I have with my family member who needs support and worry about conflict that would come up between us. What would you recommend?
That's a really big consideration, because there are a lot of times that guardianship or conservatorship or having a more formalistic kind of role as a decision maker can impact on that relationship, especially if you have strong differences of opinion on things. You can have somebody who really chafes at feeling like they're being controlled. And I think that's especially common in a parent-child relationship, but also in sibling relationships, etc. Couple options would be, really determining, is this going to be, what's going to be the best way for me to support my loved one? It may not be guardianship or conservatorship. It may be maintaining that family role, family relationship, and being a more informal supporter, using something more like supported decision making to say, hey, you can call me for these types of decisions, and I will totally help you out. I'll give you my advice. You can take it or leave it, but I'll always be there to answer your questions and try to help you out with things, but I'm not going to try to step in and make decisions for you. And if it turns out that they need someone in that role, looking to outsource that function, finding somebody else, maybe it's a family friend, maybe it's a more distant relative that can serve in that role, or even looking at a professional provider.
Okay, all right. I think I got all the questions so far that came in, Jennifer. Again, alternatives to guardianship, this was very helpful. You seem very available too, so just encourage our audience members that if they have questions to reach out to you by email or by phone.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, and so this has been great information. So thank you for sharing your expertise with the Ask Resource Center.
You are very welcome.